Right. Good morning, everyone. I know there was this word imperfection used a lot today. So I don't know about all of you, but I do feel heavy and anxious and nervous today. To speak on David, a character which is a favorite to many, a person who was called a man after God's own heart. And I know this week in the home group, you've had quite deep discussions on his life, especially a part of his life which maybe he wouldn't have been very proud about, but we had discussions about it. I am also going to touch on that topic. But before that, what I want us to do is just take a look at the entire life of David. I just want an image to be shared on screen here. Yes, this is, in a nutshell, a timeline of David's life. So, according to history and scholars, David lived for about 70 years. And we all know, okay, this might be just a random quiz question. So when you think about David, what's that one incident about him that comes to your mind? Like, what story stands out about David for all of you? Anyone? Any story? Yes, David and Goliath. Any other story? Bathsheba, yes. And so, but that was not all about David, right? If we look at his life right from the beginning, he was one of the youngest of the 8 sons which Jesse had. And when God asked Samuel to go and anoint a king for Israel, it was very easy for Jesse to just show his first 7 sons and not really show David, who was the youngest, who was shepherding the sheep in the fields. And God asked Samuel that I'm not choosing the first 7 who are elder and who might look great outwardly, but God anointed David as the king of Israel. And that was at an age when David was just about between 10 to 15 years, actually. Like, we can call that his early teen life. And once he was anointed as the king of Israel, it's not like he got to sit on the throne immediately. There was a period of time, almost about 15 to 20 years, he had to wait until he was enthroned as the king of Israel. And in that interim period, around the age when he was about 16 to 19, that's when the historic story, which we look forward to that story of David, where he was just a boy, but he went bravely to fight against that giant, for whom, like, everybody was scared to fight against him. And if you look at 1 Samuel chapter 17, verses 33 to 37. Yeah. We can just have that verse out there as I read this. It says, Saul replied, "You're not able to go out against this Philistine and fight him. You're only a young man, and he has been a warrior from his youth." But David said to Saul, "Your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine." And Saul said to David, Go, and the Lord be with you." This was David, a man after God's heart. And why was he called so? Because he did whatever God wanted him to do. And when he was put in a situation where, if you read this entire chapter 17, I'd like you to read that when you go back home, that if you look at all the instances that took place until he went and fought against Philistine, there were a couple of voices around him. Voices that came from his own people. His own brothers were angry that what was David doing there? Jesse had just sent David, I think with some food, to just go and give it to his brothers while the brothers were there when, Israel was facing this giant, and everybody was afraid to face this giant. But David goes, he looks at that opportunity, and he asks, why isn't anybody going and fighting against this man who's defying our own living God? The voices that told him that he's not able to do it, the voices that told him he's too young, it didn't matter to him. What mattered to him was the experience that he had in the fields with the sheep, which, if we look at rationally, it doesn't make sense, right? I mean, if we have to talk to David in that situation, we would have told, "Hey, David, do you even know what you're talking about? At that time, maybe God saved you from the lion and the bear, but this is one giant we are talking about. This is one giant who is saying that, you can't face him." But it didn't matter. That was David, who was brave, who had faith like a child, and for whom it didn't matter how he looked, what people said. All that mattered to him was his living God and how his God was for him. As I said, when we looked at the timeline of David, that when he became king, he was almost 37 years old. But in between those years, he lived as a young shepherd. He lived as a musician to the King Saul to soothe King Saul whenever the evil spirit came upon him. He worked as a shield bearer in the military. He was also a counselor to the king. And for several years, I did try to look up for how many years did David live as a fugitive running for his life. Actually, there's no record like how many years, but it just says that for several years, he lived as a fugitive, running for his life. And I think these years would have been the most vulnerable years of David, right? Where it probably would have been more easy for him to drift away from God, maybe even question God, that God, when I was just 10 or 11, you anointed me to be the king of Israel, and here I am. I have to be a musician, I'm a shield bearer, and now I'm running for my life. But none of these instances of his life distracted him from doing what God had asked him to do at that very moment of his life. And it didn't even, allow him to do anything that was displeasing to God while he was waiting and also desperate to be alive. He was faithful and diligent in whatever work God was leading him to do. He had an unshakable faith in his living God. When I look back at David and Goliath's story, I can just imagine a little young boy, super excited, doesn't care what's right in front of him, doesn't care that, okay, there are thousands of people afraid of one giant, doesn't matter. All he knows is, I know a God who can rescue me, and I know a God who's going to do that again. That was David. But fast forward to his life. There comes a time in his life when, God promised him, God gave him a promise in 2 Samuel chapter 7, verse 12 to 16. After he was rescued from Saul's Saul's snare, God gave him a promise that when your days are over and you rest with your ancestors, I will raise up your offspring to succeed you, your own flesh and blood. I will establish his kingdom. He's the one who will build a house for my name. I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I will be his father, and he will be my son. That was a promise that God gave to David. And that promise, actually, God did fulfill. Irrespective of what happened in David's life after that, that promise was fulfilled. But I want us to focus on what happened to David during that time. As I said, he was faithful, he was diligent. But none of these character traits actually stopped him from committing the sin for which the penalty was death. And I know we've gone through this chapter in the home group where we looked at the passage where it was a time where David was supposed to be at the war. If you look at 2 Samuel chapter 12, chapter 11 actually, verses 1, he was supposed to be at the war, but he sent, okay. I hope this won't go down. Thank you. Okay. He was supposed to be at the war, but he didn't go. He sent Joab and other kings to fight the war, and he stayed back in Jerusalem. And what happened? It was just that one moment when his eyes went to a woman. He did ask, he had a choice to say, okay, to tell himself, okay, there's a woman there, I need not look there. But he continued looking. And then he asked somebody, who's that woman? Again, he was given a chance when he was told that she's a married woman. But he didn't stop there. His temptation, his want, his desire did not stop him. It didn't stop. He went ahead, he committed adultery, and to cover up that, he even orchestrated the murder of this woman's wife. What does that tell us? That just because he was the king of Israel, just because he was a man after God's own heart, just because God gave him a promise, that didn't mean that he was insulated from facing temptations. And that does apply to all of us here, that just because we are called children of God, just because we are all sitting here in this room, maybe like amongst like-minded people, worshiping the same God, it doesn't insulate us from the temptations of this world. We are living in times where we are constantly exposed and bombarded with information, patterns, situations, people that we actually don't require at that moment. It's actually not necessary. And it's not the way God planned it for us, for his creation. But we can't always turn a blind eye or a deaf ear to that, can we? David could not. He could not stop his eyes from looking at that woman. He could not stop himself from charging against that woman. One act led to another, which eventually led him to commit the sins for which the penalty was death. He did it, and then he went ahead with his life. He thought it was hidden. He covered it up. There were people supporting him also to cover that sin. But God was looking, and God was not at all pleased with David. So he sent Nathan to confront him. And that's the turning point of this story. The turning point of this story was two things, according to me. The way Nathan confronted David, and the way David responded to this confrontation. Nathan was a prophet whom God told that you need to go and, communicate this to David, that I'm not pleased with him, and, he has sinned. And the only thing that's going to happen now is that he is going to see destruction. Nathan could have gone all guns blazing with anger. It's natural, right? If we look up to someone, for example, a leader, maybe a closed one, whom we have respected all our life, and we see them fall in front of our own eyes, and we see them do something which is not acceptable, I think it's a human response to just our first instinct is to be angry and judgmental. And the first response is to just go and say, you did this, you shouldn't have done this, and that's about it. And Nathan could have actually done that. He was asked to go share what God wanted David to know. He could have just gone and just said that bluntly, and that's about it. And he could have just said it in a way that David wouldn't have even got an opportunity to really contemplate on what he actually did. But that's not the way Nathan communicated. He starts with an example, he starts with a small story, and he brings David to that point to make him realize that that's the same thing which David did. And what was David's response to this? He could have refused to accept these charges, right? He could have just said, Nathan, I was vulnerable at that moment. He could have used his justifications, and he could have said that, well, how does it matter now? I've married that woman now. It's all covered up. It's all done and dusted. Well, what was Nathan's response? He just said, I have sinned against the Lord. And I think that happened because there were two reasons that happened. Because one, Nathan had a relationship with David. And David had a much deeper relationship with his living God, which encompassed love, respect, and reverence. Now, you may say, now this was David and Nathan. Well, characters of the Bible, story is over. They did, and we are here talking about them. But let me just share something that happened a couple of years ago. Maybe all of you know it. A news broke out about a well-known Christian evangelist and apologist. And that news broke out immediately after his death, that there were witnesses and testimonies about his sexual misconduct. I may use some words which may not be comfortable right now. But yeah, so he did some things which were not at all acceptable. Maybe even abused women and took advantage at certain situations. There was an investigation that was conducted, and reports came out that apparently when he was alive, he was confronted with those allegations, but he denied those charges. He covered it up quite well. I don't want to go into the nitty-gritties as, okay, what was the final conclusion of that investigation? Was he really guilty or not? But the reason I'm sharing this story is because I recall the reaction so many of us had for that leader. He's written really deep books. He's known as one of the greatest apologists who, talks intellectually, and he has helped many youngsters, atheists, to come to the Lord, actually have conversations with them and really make them understand who is God and what is faith, what is Christ, who is Christ, what is resurrection. But this one truth about him, when it came out, I think it was a natural reaction for all of us to suddenly say that, okay, whatever he's done all these years, I don't think we can even believe what he said, because he was doing all of that while maybe he was in that sin. So whatever he did, it doesn't hold value. And I do recall that just around that time, coincidentally, I had bought some of his books and I was reading his books. And someone known to me just happened to see that, okay, I was reading his book. And they asked me that, how can you read his book after knowing what he did? My response was that, well, while I'm reading it, I know that I'm reading words of a man who did something which was not acceptable, but the words that are coming out, definitely it's not his. God still worked through him. God still transformed lives. But we as humans, our response to look at someone like this is with judgment, with anger. We cancel them and we say that, well, just because he or she did this, they don't deserve to speak what they are speaking. They don't deserve to be where they are. My question to all of us here, including me, is what is our response when we witness one of our known circle members struggling with sin? That's one question. And the second question is, what is our response when we ourselves are confronted for our sinful act? Can we be like Nathan and David? It's hard. It's really hard. Can we respond with love, compassion? Can we converse with someone struggling with sin with an objective to restore their relationship with God and not to push them to their guilt, which they are already struggling with? They are already battling their own thing of they are not worth it. Do we want to push them back, or do we want to bring them back to their relationship with God? For me, when I look at David's life, the most favorite part for me in David's story is actually 2 Samuel chapter 12, verse 19 to 24. I'm going to be skipping a few verses, but then, so when Nathan came and David just confessed that I have sinned against the Lord, Nathan said that, well, your sins are forgiven, you won't die, but the son that whom you have will die. What did David do? He acknowledged his sin against God, and when God struck his son with illness, he still fasted and pleaded with God. He sat in a sackcloth and he still waited in an anticipation that maybe God would heal his son. But God didn't heal his son. His son died. And when we read 2 Samuel chapter 12, verses 19 to 24, I'll read it out for you. It says, David noticed that his attendants were whispering among themselves, and he realized the child was dead. Is the child dead? He asked. Yes, they replied. He's dead. Then David got up from the ground, after he had washed, put on lotions, and changed his clothes. He went into the house of the Lord and worshipped. He went into the house of the Lord and worshipped. Then he went to his own house, and at his request, they served him food, and he ate. His attendants asked him, Why are you acting this way? While the child was alive, you fasted and wept. But now that the child is dead, you get up and eat? He answered, While the child was alive, I fasted and wept. I thought, who knows, the Lord may be gracious to me and let the child live. But now that he is dead, why should I go on fasting? Can I bring him back? I'll go to him, but he will not return to me. Then David comforted his wife, Bathsheba, and he went to her, made love to her. She gave birth to a son, and they named him Solomon. The Lord loved him. I'm just going to give you a moment to process this. This was David, one of the greatest heroes of the Bible, known to kill a giant with just 5 stones when he was just a boy. But this was him now, imperfect. He had a black mark on his entire historical story that we look back on. He had a choice at that time. When his son died, he could have been in remorse, he could have been in that guilt, he could have said, okay, God has punished me according to what I had done. That's about it. That's my life now. I'm going to sit there with the sackcloth on me and just mourn and just be there. But he didn't. He got up. He washed himself. And the first thing that he did, he worshipped God. Because that's what he had been doing all his life. Even when he was a shepherd boy, even when he was just playing music to the King Saul, and even when he was running for his life in the caves, he just worshipped God. If you look at Psalms, it just says it all. He's lamenting, but in the end, he worships and praises God for who he is. And that's what he went back to do, worship him. And then he did the basics. He ate food. How does that apply to us here today? I'm sure that all of us who are here are sitting with at least one past memory that when we think about, chokes us, even today. And it's something that we are not proud about. Maybe we are also using that as a reason to not live according to the calling and the purpose God has for us. That's some of us. And some of us sitting here are hurt and angry because someone whom we placed on a pedestal failed to do what we thought they should do according to their calling. And maybe because of these reasons, we have a distorted view of God, of faith, even ourselves. But when Jesus died on the cross, he paid the price for our sins. In David's story, the son died, and that's how God said, that's a period to the sin that you committed. That's about it. But when Jesus died, he said, it is finished. The cross, his blood that was shed for you and me, his resurrection allows us to unload the weight of our sins and move on to be what he has called us to be and do what he has called us to do. You don't have to do this alone. And so I just want to summarize about 6 points, which as I'm sharing this with all of you, I'm also speaking this to myself, that what we do, where we are placed, what calling we have, does not insulate us from falling a prey to sin. And we need to live being aware of the fact that where are we placing our feet? Where are we placing our hands? What are our eyes seeing? My second point, let's not place people on a pedestal because of their outward deeds or what we think they should be doing according to their responsibilities. Because we all are flawed. And all of us are in need of restoration and redemption. Just like David was humble enough, my fourth point is, let's be humble enough to acknowledge our shortcomings. And can we be compassionate truth tellers and prayer partners to ones who are struggling with their shortcomings? James chapter 5, verses 16 and 19 says, therefore, confess your sins to each other and pray for each other so that you may be healed. The prayer of a righteous man is powerful and effective. My brothers and sisters, if one of you should wander from the truth, and someone should bring that person back. So I'm reiterating what I'm saying, what I said a while back. It's time to move on from the guilt and shame of our imperfect and unacceptable acts, because Jesus said, it is finished. And you don't have to do it alone. You don't have to struggle in that dark corner of your room every night, pleading, moaning, with guilt and with remorse that, God, I did it. I don't know why I did it. I shouldn't have done it. But yes, you did it. It happened. And God is saying, you're not alone. I'm with you. And I've also given you my people who are with you, around you, to help you come out of this. You know, lately we have been doing this. We've learned about the safeguarding policy, right? And I know after service, a couple of us are actually going to meet to be trained how to help somebody who may have been abused or may have been violated within the church because of many acts or reasons. That's one way to be a safe church. But I think being safe for one another starts when we become okay to listen to someone who's sharing their dark secrets. To just listen. Not to give them a moral lecture that, oh, you should have done this, you could have done this. That's not the way. Listen, be with them, stay with them, and pray with them, pray for them. That's the beginning to start a safe culture in a community where none of us here are perfect. We are all flawed. And the other reason to do that is, and maybe I'm repeating myself when I say this, that there's work to be done outside these four walls. This is a very safe place. And sometimes I tell myself that I think it's very easy to share the gospel here because all of you who are sitting here, whatever I'm saying makes sense, right? At least a little bit. All of you will agree. But the challenge is there are people outside these four walls whose hearts and souls are yearning to listen to the gospel, but they don't know it. And there's work. And we, all of us, are laborers in his vineyard to work for his kingdom. And I'd like to end by saying that let's live to serve him and his creation, because we do have an unfinished task ahead of us. And though, yes, all of us are set apart and we have a calling, but I want to go back to emphasize that maybe some of us over here need to just humbly confess to God that, God, I have sinned against you. Not against a person, not done something wrong as per, the moral society or ethics, but I've sinned against you. And today I want all of us to first confess it together. I love this verse from Psalm 32, verse 3 to 5, which David prayed. He said, when I kept silent, my bones wasted away through my groaning all day long. For day and night your hand was heavy on me. My strength was sapped as in the heat of summer. Then I acknowledged my sin to you and did not cover up my iniquity. I said, I will confess my transgressions to the Lord, and you forgive the guilt of my sin. Today I invite all of you to confess and not be silent. We'll have Psalm 51 put up right now. And it's going to be from the Message version. Just a moment. And while this is put up, I urge all of you to just repeat as I say this. May this be your prayer. If you're not okay to say it, maybe just say it silently, but say it. Psalm chapter 51, and it goes like this. Generous in love, God give mercy, huge in mercy. God give grace, huge in mercy, wipe out my bad record. Can you all repeat that? Scrub away my guilt, soak out my sins in your laundry. I know how bad I've been. My sins are staring me down. You're the one I've violated, and you've seen it all. Seen the full extent of my evil. You have all the facts before you. Whatever you decide about me is fair. I've been out of step with you for a long time, in the wrong since before I was born. What you're after is truth from the inside out. Enter me then, conceive a new true life. Soak me in your laundry, and I'll come out clean. Scrub me, and I'll have a snow white life. Tune me into foot-tapping songs. Set these once broken bones to dancing. Don't look too close for blemishes. Give me a clean bill of health. God, make a fresh start in me. Shape a Genesis week from the chaos of my life. Don't throw me out with the trash or fail to breathe holiness in me. Bring me back from gray exile. Put a fresh wind in my sails. Give me a job teaching rebels your ways so that the lost can find their way home. Commute my death sentence, God, my salvation, God, and I'll sing anthems to your life-giving ways. Unbutton my lips, dear God, I'll let loose with your praise. Going through the motions doesn't please you. A flawless performance is nothing to you. I learned God worship when my pride was shattered. Heart-shattered lives, ready for love, don't for a moment escape God's notice. Make Zion the place you delight in. Repair Jerusalem's broken down walls. Then you will get real worship from us, acts of worship, small and large. Including all the bulls they can heave onto your altar. Amen.